Hey everybody, Ray Pastor, and tonight we're going to finish up the topic of paying off and getting out of debt. All right, so we've talked about tallying up your debt. We've talked about figuring out monthly budget and expenses. We've talked about how to cut those. We've talked about coming up with a plan, all the considerations that you need to take into when coming up with a plan to pay off debt, what you can actually do. And tonight we're going to talk about the final step. Final step is not falling into the same habit again. So how do we do it? What have we learned throughout the whole process? So assuming that you now have a monthly budget that you've been somehow paying off, hopefully the plan is once you've paid all this debt off, you actually start saving money. You stay in the same budget and save money. So let's talk about not falling into the same trap again, and let's talk about saving, how you save, a little bit about where you should save your money and how much. All right. So first things first, we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here in the first place? What was it that prompted us to get here? Now, for some people, I'd say there's very few circumstances where I understand why you're in debt. Because even if you tell me that you had a large medical expense or a large this or a large that, I will just simply ask you, well, where was your emergency fund? Because usually the problem is people think, well, it was just this one big expense and that's why I'm in debt. But the problem is, why didn't you have an emergency fund? Now, obviously, if you had some like $200,000 expense, I wouldn't expect you to have that much in an emergency fund or saved up yet necessarily. But still, you should have an emergency fund to cover the bulk of these one-time emergencies that come up. Like your AC goes out and you have to pay $6,000 for a new air conditioner or whatever. You should have emergency fund money for that kind of stuff. All right, so there are very few reasons why you should have fallen into this trap. Okay, so let's talk about avoiding getting there again. So assuming it didn't happen to you because of some large, big expense. Let's assume you got there from many expenses, or, lots of credit cards, too expensive car, too expensive house, whatever it happens to be. You're buying clothes, you're ordering stuff off Amazon or whatever. Okay, so here's what you need to do. First of all, you need to continue what you've been doing as far as paying off the debt. That money should now be going into some emergency savings account. You should not be just saying, okay, I can spend whatever again. I can get credit cards again. No, you're the type of person you should not have credit cards until you really have this under control. You need to have some self-discipline because you got here in the first place. You need some good self-discipline to avoid getting there in the first place, getting here in this situation again. So what I like to do, what I recommend, is you have a set limit. You've budgeted out. You have to budget out your monthly expenses and say to yourself, okay, I can spend $200 a month on going out to eat. Okay, so you have $200. And every time you go out to eat, you write down, I spent $50. I spent $75. And when you hit the $200 mark, I guess I'm done going out to eat for the month. Whatever it happens to be, groceries. This is how much I'm going to spend on groceries this month. This is how much I'm going to spend on this. This is how much I spend on gas. This is how much I spend on if I have a clothes budget or whatever. And that's it. You get the spreadsheet. You hit your magic number. Boom, you're done. Can't spend any more. That's what you have to do. You have to be, if you cannot be that disciplined, you're going to fall into debt again. It's one of the reasons I tell people who are usually struggling with debt not to use credit cards, because they become problematic. I love credit cards for certain reasons, but usually people struggling with debt, that's not who the credit cards are for. So I usually tell you not to get them. So I would really recommend not getting one. I'd really recommend using a debit card or cash and keeping track on your phone, like using Google Docs that you can use on your phone and your computer, of every single time you spend money. Let's make sure you don't fall into the problem again. So sit there and look at the budget that you've already figured out, maybe modify it a little bit as you pay off debt, and boom. So that's first step. That's step one, is budgeting yourself out, making sure you're not falling into the same trap. Step two, and I already mentioned the word a couple times, emergency fund. So how much of an emergency fund should you have? It's kind of interesting. So an emergency fund is the first thing you should be saving up for. Before I start saving for retirement, before I start doing anything, I should have an emergency fund. Now, in the general rule of thumb is an emergency fund should be enough to make you to that you could live off of for 6 months. So generally it's 6 months of your salary. So let's say you make $5,000 a month. You should have 5 times 6, $30,000 in the bank saved up as an emergency fund for rainy days, for when your brakes go out, for when your AC goes out, for when there's a $10,000, $15,000 medical expense. And then when you use it, you replenish it. First thing you do immediately after pulling money out of an emergency fund is replenish it. This is an emergency fund. 6 months. Now, having watched what's happened with COVID in the last year, I'm much more comfortable telling people they should probably have 12 months salary saved up. I watched what happened in the pandemic. I think a lot of people, it was more like 8 to 10 months of really bad, hard, difficult times during COVID. And some people, it's a year still going through it. So I really think that if you can and are able to save up 12 months salary, I really think that that's a much nicer emergency fund than 6 months. Now, what should you do with this emergency fund that you save up? Where should you put it? So I generally, and I'll talk about this in other videos, but I generally like to put this emergency fund, I don't put it in a CD because, there are some issues taking those out and stuff, and you're trying to guarantee that your money's going to be in them for a while. I like to put my money in what's called a high yield savings account. High yield savings account. These generally might pay 10 times more than your average bank's savings account. There are all kinds of different banks. Just type in Google high yield savings account. You can find all the comparisons of interest rates and pick one of those. It's a great place to store your emergency fund, and that's where I put and recommend you put your emergency fund, because if let's say you get 1% per year, 1% off 30 grand actually starts to add up for you. So, and then you start earning interest on that interest as you don't use the money. So it's much better to be to actually getting something for this money. So, yeah, those are the steps. You have to think about what got me here. How do I avoid getting into this situation again? Come up with that plan, the monthly plan, and follow it. Use a debit card. I really don't recommend a credit card for people who are having debt issues. I'd really avoid that until you have it really under control. Then we can start talking about the strategies for wisely using a credit card and how to actually make money from credit cards. But I think for now, I really would push you away from the credit card. Use a debit card. Use cash. Tally on your phone. Tally on your computer. Use something like Google Sheets or whatever you want to use. I don't care. I'm not making money from Google Sheets. So I do own Google stock though, but no, I'm not making any money from using Google Sheets. So, use a piece of software that you like to tally your expenses. And, I prefer Google Sheets because I can just use it everywhere. I like Excel and it's very similar. So, find something that you can use. Only spend that amount of money. It's really simple. I mean, just as an example, and I've talked about this before, but so me and my wife, we know that our monthly groceries, we have $1,000. That's it. And that includes alcohol too, like anything we want to buy, that like at the grocery store type stuff. So I know we have $250 a week, and that's all she has to spend because she usually does most of the shopping. But if I buy something like at Sam's or do a big Costco run, like it cuts into that. So, you say I have $250 this week to buy groceries. That's it. I choose to order online so that I can actually tally up the amount. It's very easy to do. It's a lot harder to do in store. Order it, go pick it up. I know exactly how much I spent. I do that with everything. I don't even have a clothes budget anymore. I have little bonuses throughout the year where I might buy clothes, but I don't even have that in my budget anymore. I've cut a lot of unnecessary things out in order to save and have more income. Remember, the only ways to get more money are to get a higher paying job or paid more money or save more money, spend less. So, those are your options. And usually you're in debt, your option is spending less money. So we're going to tally that up, and we're going to only spend a certain amount so that we do not go in debt again. And we're also going to make sure that we put away enough money for an emergency fund, hopefully at least 6 months of living expenses, so that if you lose your job and need 2 months to go find another job, you have a little bit of money. Do not rely on the government giving you unemployment, all these loans and all this stuff. Just assume that that might not be there when you need it. So, it's not always. So I never would rely on that, on unemployment or anything. Just don't rely that that's going to be there. Rely on yourself. Financial independence, your financial independence from everyone else, is super important. Builds confidence in yourself, helps relieve stress, and helps you stay permanently out of debt, which is the real goal, to stay out of debt, not get in that situation again. All right. If you have any questions, this is the end of this short part of getting out of your debt. We'll go into some other topics over the next, as we continue along. So, all right, later, everybody. See ya.